One of the most unfortunate cultural developments in modern history is the toxic masculinity of the manosphere. It's rampant and it's stupid. But if you're a man watching this, a big, strong, manly man, or maybe a sad, lonely, physically puny, but mentally manly man, then you're already sitting there questioning everything about my man qualifications, because I'm throwing out ideas here that threaten your entire identity. As much as I really don't care about these things, I do know the drill, so I'm putting myself out there for you as a trusted resource, and in doing so, I will give you my man resume. I started training in mixed martial arts when I was just 7 years old, and 5 different styles, armed and unarmed. I've kicked so many asses in my lifetime. The sheer numbers would be so overwhelming for a lot of the manosphere to take in, like their tiny brains would just not be able to hold the numbers so high, and they just kind of melt. These days, I win sword fighting tournaments. I literally study the blade, as the meme goes. Why am I saying these things at all? Because the manosphere only responds to strength, and it quiets down in the face of loud noises and massive aggressive energy. That's what I'm putting out in order to get some big manly attention. Now that I have that attention, let's work on expanding the male consciousness and opening it up to ideas that might surprise and alarm, but hopefully also liberate. Let's be manly about not being manly, god damn it. And let's break down how this whole shit pot of hyper-masculine nonsense even got started. I'm Kevin Lankus, and I'm your host for our super unfortunate cultural regression into 1950s male stereotypes. God, make your own sandwich, Andrew Tate, you gigantic frothing asshole. Something that's going to surprise the hell out of you is that the manosphere began during the second wave feminism movement of the 1970s, and not as a reactive sort of pendulum swing to antagonize feminism, but the original men's liberation movement, as it was called, was an ally of feminism and an extension of it. If women were trapped in the home because of the cultural gender stereotype of homemaker, mother, and maid, then men were exiled from the home due to the expectations of their gender stereotype. Men's liberation began as a way to genuinely free men from the weight of social pressures to not connect with their families, to toil away at jobs they hated and waste their lives in isolation and loneliness with no emotional availability to connect with those they truly loved. Men's liberation admitted to the fact that the patriarchy wasn't just bad for women, but also for men. And the movement pushed for a complete rethinking of what it meant to be a man under modern American capitalism, a term that stemmed from the men's liberation movement and also in minority empowerment movements was consciousness raising, which is a precursor to the term woke today. Jack Nichols, author of A New Definition of Masculinity, wrote that, quote, "Tomorrow, men will look back on the 1970s and remark on the constriction affecting their sex. In further decades, today's male role will be remembered as a straitjacket." Unfortunately, that tomorrow isn't quite here yet, but let's not tell him. Because when California movie star Ronald Reagan came to power in the 1980s, he conducted a culture war that shut down progress on conversations about improving conditions for everyone. This is a key moment where right-wing philosophy tied their traditional values with financial policies and the political capital of the GOP. The problem was, of course, that traditional values are a myth, and they always have been. There's a really great book on this called The Way We Never Were by Stephanie Coontz. It debunks the entire nostalgia trip about so-called traditional American values. Now, at the very best, the picture that's painted of the nuclear family from the 1950s was a supremely short-lived phenomenon, and of course, only for white middle-class people in one very specific sliver of society and geography. And most of the things conservatives tell you about how amazing this era made America are also just complete fabrications. It was around this time that Warren Farrell, a very public and prominent figure in the men's liberation movement, did a complete heel turn and became a figurehead for the polar opposite men's rights movement. Farrell wrote the book that became the Bible for basement-dwelling neckbeards everywhere, and that book was called The Myth of Male Power. The biggest issue with men's rights movements then and now is that they don't possess any actual win conditions. For pretending to be stereotypically masculine, they're the biggest bunch of whiners around. Men's rights advocates whine that women need to be put back in their place, which is the home. But if they're there, then they're lazy freeloaders, and they're out spending the man's money and eating the man's food, never mind that they're also making the man's food. And if women express any agency, God forbid, maybe get a job, then they're stealing work from the big, strong men who need it. Men's rights advocacy is defined by a constant victim mindset threaded with a confused narrative that doesn't have any basis in reality at all. The feelings are real, but they're misguided and targeted toward women instead of actual systems that oppress all people. With the rise of the internet, men's rights groups found one another and began to splinter off into new factions that were defined by different beliefs, though always fundamentally centered around their hatred of women and equality. Everybody's favorite punching bag example of these newer men's rights groups are incels, or involuntary celibates. The term incel was coined by a bisexual woman in Toronto who wrote a blog about people who wanted romantic relationships but couldn't get them. But its current usage has little to do with that and instead describes men who believe that women having rights means that they can't ever get laid. Early men's rights groups co-opted the ideas from the original blog and moved them to their own spaces, famously like the platform 4chan when that launched in 2003. Incels also developed the red pill philosophy, borrowing it misguidedly from the 1999 blockbuster sci-fi classic The Matrix. In 2014 in Santa Barbara, the first violent killings inspired by the incel community were perpetrated, but they would not be the last. Websites and forums were closed after the incident, but the killer wrote a manifesto and his online activity was found and propagated, and the damage was done. And this is the moment where incel culture became decidedly more violent and intolerant, with outright malice as the underlying motivating factor rather than existential sorrow. And then directly after this, GamerGate happened. An ex-boyfriend of game developer Zoe Quinn posted a 9,000-word rant that accused Quinn of questionable behavior, like sleeping with an industry journalist for a positive game review. The accusations were thoroughly debunked, but the floodgates opened in a desperate and devastating way. Multiple prominent women in the industry were harassed, doxxed with their personal information and details about their lives, addresses leaked. And while 4chan was a starting point for all of it, soon the madness had taken over all of social media and the digital realm. GamerGate was an absolute travesty. It was a very ugly time to see firsthand, and it laid the foundation for every torch-bearing mob that assembles against media it doesn't like today. Case in point, just see any Disney movie that's been released in the last decade or so and the alt-right backlash against it. The harassment, the review bombing, with all of this intentionally fueled by AI bot activity to encourage the self-righteous mob mentality chaos. Even figures like Steve Bannon leaped on this immediately because he recognized and said out loud how efficient it was to scoop up the miscreants coming in through GamerGate and pivoting them just a bit to latch onto the hateful politics of Donald Trump. But there are many other groups aside from incels. There's also the pickup artists, or PUAs. They've been around for decades in varying forms, but more recently they've devolved into a movement that encourages deception in order to ultimately sleep with women. They live by the term plowing through resistance, which is another way of not understanding or not respecting that no means no. This is echoed in the viral tweet from Nick Fuentes, who wrote the phrase, "Your body, my choice." PUAs believe in a sexual marketplace where everyone has an assigned value and that only 20% of men have a shot with 80% of women. Then there's the men going their own way, or MGTOW, or MGTOW. These guys are so extreme that the Southern Poverty Law Center has designated them a white supremacist hate group. They believe that third wave feminism has created a society that discriminates against men, so they advocate for dropping out of the world altogether and creating a single gender society just for men. And they believe things like women are just all waiting to accuse men of sexual assault in order to destroy their lives. Then there's the Sigma males, who are supposed to be the most super awesome version of a man you could ever get. They're cool, they're withdrawn, and super composed action movie assassin types. Sigmas identify themselves with Keanu Reeves, who by all accounts would want nothing to do with them if you knew that. Laying the foundation for Sigmas, the idea of alphas and betas came first, which established a hierarchy of men based on the debunked theory of wolf packs. Now, in case you didn't know, the alpha wolf study was concluded based on a misunderstanding of the behavior of mating parents in captivity. So of course it's not true of people, because it's not even true of wolves, where it's supposed to come from. All of these ideas and group dynamics have been pushed by a number of key figures over the years, and sometimes, sure, maybe indirectly. Lots of people will say, for instance, that it's not fair to lump Joe Rogan into the mix, but he platforms these people and has never challenged the misinformation they spew, and oftentimes his response is actually to validate what they're saying. Another major figure who legitimized the manosphere, maybe also kind of indirectly, was PewDiePie. In 2013, PewDiePie became the most popular YouTuber ever. He started in game content and Let's Play videos, but a few years later, his content changed. And a good example of that change is the time when he read erotic fan fiction about the Disney movie Frozen in one of his episodes. He also freely used slurs that described minority groups and anti-Semitic language and content, and was generally very careless with the responsibility of having a massive and impressionable younger male audience. PewDiePie was eventually dropped from a Google advertising deal and a YouTube Red series after he ran an episode featuring two men holding a sign that said, "Death to all Jews." Now, he likely laid a very solid foundation for the later extreme provocateur personalities that would emerge to take the manosphere to a new frequency of stupid. Some of those provocateurs are people like Jordan Peterson, Ben Shapiro, and Andrew Tate. Tate is by far the most extreme of the bunch, and you may recognize his name because he just spent a good while under house arrest in Romania after he was picked up by authorities there on charges of sex trafficking and organized crime. There aren't enough words in existence to describe how vile this guy is, and I don't really want you to look him up either, so if you don't already know, I'll try my best here. He rose to immense global fame by filming himself on frothy, spitting, angry rants about women. He was kicked off the show Big Brother for alleged domestic violence. He's had multiple abuse allegations against women. He currently runs a so-called Hustlers University pyramid scheme to take money from impressionable kids that he encourages to be as controversial as he is. Tate has said things like he is, quote, absolutely a misogynist, and, quote, there's no way you can be rooted in reality and not be sexist, and he was banned from Twitter for saying that women should, quote, bear responsibility for being assaulted. He's been singled out as a source of growing violence in young men by counter-terrorism task forces. Tate is an idiot, and that should already be apparent, but there's also the part where he was first located and arrested because he picked a fight on Twitter with Greta Thunberg, and then somewhere during the exchange, he accidentally tweeted out a picture of himself sitting with a pizza box from a pizza place around the corner from him. Look, at holy hell, we are in an uphill battle against this craziness, and it's a fact that we are not taking it as seriously as we need to be. These groups and the ideologies they spew are not widely publicized. And the most you hear about them is incels, who are just scratching the surface here. And then maybe you hear about Tate when he gets arrested, and also when Trump just forced Romania to send him back because, you know, of course, those two would be aligned ideologically. But there is a massive risk in not outright addressing this growing issue of toxic masculinity in the manosphere. More people are jumping in and more work is being done, but it's just not enough. We need more people to be informed that this is even happening, and they need to understand the foundations and origins of it in order to talk to their sons, their friends, the young men in their lives, and others who may also not know that any of this is going on at all, or who see the violence that results from this and they just don't know why. They think it's a lone wolf suffering from mental illness issues, which is the narrative from the media, but that's not it at all. It's the manosphere culture creating an environment that encourages antisocial rhetoric and behavior, and under the right conditions, that descends into violence. I'm going to keep talking about this, and I plan to do a few more episodes surrounding the different movements and key figures and what we can do about any of it. Please make sure to like and subscribe to the channel in order to make sure you see those when they come out. If you have things to add or personal experiences with any of this, please comment below so that others can benefit from the insight you provide. We all need to stick together here and build a culture of tolerance and acceptance and equality and fight this manosphere bullshit. And I want to say thank you directly for having these hard conversations with me. Let's do our best out there. Let's do some f***ing good about extreme cultural regression and young male radicalization from far-right influencers and grifters. That's right, Andrew. You make that sandwich all on your own, preferably from prison, so like a turd sandwich. You eat a turd sandwich. He's just a great guy to have over for a dinner party. I can't even say that with a straight face. Oh my god, what an absolute monster. Okay, Toxic Masculinity, the musical.